Nobody tells you that the morning of your wedding is the loneliest morning of your life. They tell you other things. They tell you it goes by fast, so try to slow down and take it in. They tell you to eat something before the ceremony because you will forget to eat at the reception. They tell you to look at your groom when you walk down the aisle, not at the guests, not at the flowers, not at the photographer, at him, only at him, because that is the moment you will want to remember. Nobody tells you that you will stand in front of a mirror at 6 in the morning in a hotel suite that costs more per night than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by women who love you, and feel, beneath the happiness and the nerves and the specific giddiness of a day you have planned for 14 months, a thin and persistent unease that you cannot locate or name. Only feel the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm, before the sky has given any visible sign that something is coming. Whitley Whitfield had felt it for 2 weeks. She had not told anyone, not her mother, not her maid of honor, not the therapist she had stopped seeing 8 months ago when things with Brennan had felt settled and good, and like something she no longer needed outside help to navigate. She had told no one because she did not have anything specific to tell, only the feeling, only the pressure, only the name she had found in his phone on a Tuesday evening when he had left it on the kitchen counter, and a notification had lit the screen before she could look away. Celeste. And beneath it, in the preview of the message Brennan had sent, "Don't let her contact me again." She had not picked up the phone. She had not read the full message. She had stood in the kitchen for a long moment looking at the counter where the phone lay face up, and then she had walked to the window and looked at the city and told herself what she would spend the next 2 weeks, telling herself in various arrangements. It was nothing. It was the ex-wife. He had mentioned her once unstable, difficult, unable to accept that the marriage was over. A protective order had been filed. It was nothing. It was handled. The wedding was in 2 weeks, and it was nothing. She had believed it the way you believe something when the alternative is a question you are not ready to answer. The suite was full of women and flowers, and the particular noise of happiness being performed, and felt simultaneously her mother, Patricia, directing the florist with the focused authority of a woman who had been planning this day in her head since Whitley was 12. Her 2 bridesmaids, Dana and Reese, opening a bottle of champagne at 9 in the morning with the cheerful justification that it was practically noon somewhere, the hairstylist, the makeup artist, the photographer moving through it all like a benevolent ghost, catching moments Whitley would look at later and think, "I looked happy," and I was. Both things were true at once. She sat in the chair in front of the mirror and let the stylist work, and looked at her own face and tried to locate the feeling, to pin it down, to give it a shape she could examine, and then set aside. It was nothing. Brennan loved her. She knew that. She had watched him, over 2 years, become someone she believed in: his steadiness, his ambition, the specific way he listened when she talked, like what she was saying was the most important thing in the room. She had watched him and chosen him, and she was not wrong to have done it. People had exes. People had difficult histories. The woman in his phone was his past, and Whitley was his present, and in approximately 7 hours, she would be his future, and the feeling would go away because it was nothing. The stylist pinned the last section of her hair into place. Whitley looked at herself in the mirror and smiled, and it was a real smile, and it was also the smile of a woman who has decided, firmly and finally, not to look too closely at certain things today. The ceremony was everything she had imagined. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm and looked at Brennan the way she had been told to, only at him, only at his face, and what she saw there was what she needed to see. A man who was moved, genuinely moved, by the sight of her. His eyes were bright. His jaw was set in the way it set when he was feeling something he did not have the vocabulary to say. He took her hands and held them, and she felt the warmth of his grip and thought, "This is real. This is true." Whatever the feeling was, it was not stronger than this. She said her vows in a voice that did not shake. He said his in a voice she had never heard him use before, lower than usual, slower, like each word was being considered before it was released. He had written them himself. She had not known that until he started speaking, and the surprise of it, the intimacy of it, had moved her more than anything else in the ceremony. He was not a man who showed his interior easily. She had spent 2 years learning the specific language of his silences, the particular way he communicated care through action rather than declaration. And here he was, in front of 300 people, declaring. She had cried then. Real tears, not performed ones. The feeling had gone quiet. It came back during the reception. Not loudly. Not with any particular catalyst, just the slow return of pressure, like a tide coming in. She was at the head table, accepting congratulations, holding her champagne glass, laughing at the right moments, being exactly who she was supposed to be on exactly the day she was supposed to be it. And somewhere beneath all of that, the feeling. She excused herself from the table at some point in the first hour, told Dana she needed a moment, and stepped away from the bridesmaids toward the edge of the room. That was when she saw her. She knew immediately, not from recognition, because she had never seen Celeste before, but from the quality of her stillness. The woman stood near the back pillar with the particular composure of someone who is working very hard to appear as though they are not working at all, and she was visibly, unmistakably pregnant. And she was watching the room with eyes that had already seen everything in it and had decided something. Whitley stopped walking. Something moved through her, a sensation she could not immediately identify, somewhere between recognition and dread, and then she understood what it was. It was the feeling she had been carrying for 2 weeks, finally arriving at a shape. She crossed to where the woman was standing before she had consciously decided to do it. "You are Celeste," she said. "Yes. He told me you were unstable, that you had been harassing him, that there was a protective order." A pause. "There is not one, is there?" "No, there is not." Whitley looked at her. At the dress, navy, simple, the kind of dress a woman wears when it is the only one that fits. At the unmistakable curve of her stomach. At her face, not the face of an unstable woman, not the face of a woman who was there to cause a scene, but the face of a woman who had already been through something and was standing in it with a steadiness that Whitley, in that moment, did not feel she herself possessed. "I found your name in his phone 2 weeks ago," Whitley said. Almost to herself, he said. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Then, like a door being carefully pulled shut, "I should get back." She walked away. She did not look back. She returned to the table and picked up her champagne and smiled at the people who were smiling at her and told herself, one final time, that it was nothing. She did not entirely believe it anymore. She watched Brennan find Celeste at 8:47. She was not looking for it. She was in conversation with one of Brennan's colleagues, nodding at something she was not fully tracking. When she saw Brennan's eyes move across the room and stop, she followed his gaze. Celeste was standing near the east wall. She had not moved from the periphery. She was not making a scene. She was simply standing there, in the way that a fact simply exists, quietly, immovably, requiring no performance to be true. Brennan excused himself. Whitley watched him cross the room, watched him stop in front of Celeste, watched the conversation that she could not hear, the lean of his body, the set of his jaw, the particular tension in his shoulders that she recognized as the posture he used when he needed something to go the way he had decided it should go. She watched Celeste not move, and she felt, in that moment, a shift inside herself, not dramatic, not the sudden collapse of everything she believed, but the quiet, irrevocable movement of something that had been held in place by an act of will, finally releasing. Like a door she had been leaning against from the inside, slowly swinging open. She turned back to the colleague and said something appropriate and smiled, and the conversation continued, and she was present for none of it. She was standing near the head table at 9:34 when it happened. She heard the tear before she understood what it was. A sharp, clean sound that did not belong to any instrument, to any moment in the program she had spent 14 months organizing. Then the music stopped. Then the conversation stopped. She looked. Celeste was standing against a pillar with her dress torn at the shoulder, and Brennan was 2 feet away from her with his hand open at his side, and the expression on his face was one Whitley had never seen before, not because it was new to him, but because it was the first time she had seen it without the layer of management he usually kept over it. Raw and exposed. The face of a man who has just done something he cannot undo and knows it. Whitley did not move. She stood very still and looked at the man she had married 4 hours ago and felt the 2 years of her relationship with him rearranging themselves, not disappearing, not becoming false, but reorganizing around this new information the way a landscape reorganizes around a fault line, the same geography, different underlying structure. She thought about the phone. the name, the protective order that did not exist. She thought about the conversation she had walked away from 2 hours ago in this same room. She thought about the vows he had written himself, the voice she had never heard him use before, the way his eyes had been bright at the altar. She thought, both things can be true. A man can be moved and also be a man who does this. These are not contradictions. This is just who he is, and I did not know it, and now I do. Celeste walked to the stage and took the microphone. Whitley watched her. She watched Celeste stand in front of 300 people with a torn dress and a 6 months pregnant body and a voice that did not shake and say things that Whitley heard from a distance, not because she was not paying attention, but because she was paying a different kind of attention, the kind that does not process information in the moment, but holds it, files it, returns to it later when the room is quiet enough to hear it clearly. She heard, 14 months ago, asset transfers, Delaware, income figures that did not match. She heard, the divorce agreement he signed 7 months ago. She heard, a single reference to the child I am carrying. And she heard, beneath all of it, the thing that was not said but was present in every word. I was here. I existed. You cannot make me not have existed by refusing to write my name. Brennan stepped forward. These documents are fabricated. She has been... Whitley heard her own voice before she had decided to use it. Brennan. He turned. Stop. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not anger, not calculation, but something closer to appeal. The look of a man reaching for something he has always been able to reach before and finding it gone. Just stop, she said again. She was not shaking. She had expected to be shaking. She was not. She was very calm in the way that a person is calm when they have moved through the worst of something and come out on the other side and discovered that the other side, while not what they expected, is something they can stand on. She had nothing else to say to him, not tonight. Tonight was not for saying things. Tonight was for understanding what had happened, and for the specific, private work of beginning to separate what had been real from what had been managed. That work would take time. It would not begin here, in front of 300 people, in a white dress that now felt like a costume. She set her champagne glass down. When Celeste crossed the room toward her, Whitley watched her come. She had time, in those 30 seconds, to feel several things in sequence. The instinctive resistance of a woman whose territory was being entered, the rapid collapse of that resistance when she remembered who had actually been trespassed upon here, and then something simpler and harder to name, a recognition. The particular experience of seeing yourself in someone else's history and understanding, with uncomfortable clarity, how close you came to not seeing it in time. Celeste stopped in front of her. I did not come here for him. I want you to know that. Whitley looked at her. At the torn dress held together by nothing but composure. At the stomach, the baby inside it, the life that had been written out of a legal document as though it were a clerical error. At the face of a woman who had come to this room not with anger, but with something more durable, the particular resolve of someone who has decided that the truth is worth the cost of saying it. Something in Whitley's chest opened. I know, she said. Then, because it was true, and because it was the only thing that was adequate to the moment. Thank you. Celeste held her gaze one moment longer. Then she turned and walked to the exit, and the room made space for her, and she went through the door, and she was gone. Whitley stood in the wreckage of the evening and did not cry. She would cry later in the car on the way to the hotel, with her mother's hand over hers and the city passing dark outside the window. She would cry the way people cry when the grief is not simple, when what is lost was both real and not what they believed it to be, and both of those things have to be mourned separately and together at the same time. But here, now, in the ballroom where the band had not resumed and the guests were gathered in their uncertain clusters, and her father was already in conversation with his attorney on the far side of the room, she stood and looked at the space where Celeste had been and felt, beneath the grief and the shock and the very long night that was still ahead of her, something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for what had happened, not for the torn dress or the documents, or the way the evening had come apart in the space of 20 minutes, but for the woman who had walked into this room knowing what it would cost her, and had told the truth anyway, who had looked at Whitley, at the end, not as an enemy or a rival or an inconvenience, but as someone who deserved to know. The room was still making its sounds around her voices, movement, the particular noise of an occasion converting itself into something unplanned. She let it. She stood in the middle of it and breathed and thought about what came next, and for the first time all evening, the feeling that thin and persistent unease she had been carrying for 2 weeks was gone. Not because everything was all right, because she finally knew what it had been trying to tell her. Later, much later, she would think about what it means to believe in someone. Not the romantic version, not the version that requires the other person to be perfect, or to never disappoint you, or to be exactly who they presented themselves to be at every moment, but the real version, the version where you look at the evidence of who someone is, all of it, including the parts that are difficult and the parts that are inconvenient and the parts that require you to ask questions you would rather not ask, and you make a decision with open eyes. She had not had open eyes, she understood that now, but she was opening them, and that, she thought, standing in the ruins of the most carefully planned evening of her life, was the only thing she could do, the only thing any person could do, when the version of the world they had believed in turned out to be less than they thought. Open your eyes, look at what is actually there, and decide what you want to do with what you see. She picked up her champagne glass, set it back down when she realized she did not want it, and went to find her mother. Outside, the night was cool and smelled of rain. Somewhere across the city, a woman was going home, and in a ballroom emptying of its guests and its music and its carefully arranged flowers, another woman was beginning the long and necessary work of figuring out who she was now and what she would build from here, and whether the thing she was building might, this time, be entirely her own.